series on forgiveness. And it is based on the work of Desmond and Mfu Tutu's book of Forgiving, the fourfold path of healing ourselves and the world. And so it's going to start off with sharing another forgiveness story, a forgiveness story that was shared by two gentlemen, Jarnell McGee and Andrew Collins. In 2009, Andrew was a cop, and he wanted to, I guess they received credit for, he was on the drug enforcement unit and, wanted to receive credit for how many arrests that he could make, finding people who were drug dealers and putting them behind bars. And so part of this desire went into a consciousness aligned in malice, where he would begin to arrest people who really were not dealing drugs. And one such gentleman in which he accused and arrested was a gentleman named Jarnell McGee. And so he was arrested, and he was actually convicted and was put in prison. And it wasn't until, 4 years, he served 4 years. 4 years he was in prison. So Jarnell is a black African-American man, and Andrew is a white police officer. Just giving you some of those details. And so while he was in prison, Jarnell was looking forward to the day when he would be released so that he can go and find Andrew and inflict harm on him. And in another piece that was published, an article that was published by the prison fellowship, in that interview, Jarnell shares about the anger, the resentment, and the rage that he experienced. And I think any one of us could understand that, right? To be falsely accused and now you are behind bars in jail. And so a non-profit organization called Mosaic Christian Communities came into the prison and was offering counseling support. And Jarnell participated, and later on we find out that Andrew participated. Eventually it was found out what was going on. And Andrew Jarnell was released from jail. But while he was receiving these counseling support, Jarnell began to tell his story, name his hurts. And he began to place his faith in the power of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not something we can wrap our heads around with our human minds. Carolyn Mays talks about forgiveness being a mystical act. That in our willingness to forgive, that we free ourselves, but in that willingness to walk that path, we are met by something profound and much greater than ourselves. And so Jarnell said yes to that. And in the interview that I wanted to show this morning, we see that they find themselves now being placed in this work program that Mosaic put them in this coffee shop, luncheonette type of place, and here they were, the two of them, right? We also know that Andrew had to do some soul searching himself, and he shared that he wound up fessing up to Jarnell, no excuses, about his malice and that he offered him apology. And in the interview, we see, as Jarnell tells his part of the story, that he moves from wanting to seek revenge, okay? We know that we are faced with two choices, as the Tutus share in their book, that when hurt is inflicted upon us, that we have one of two choices. We could consciously or unconsciously choose to enter the cycle of revenge, or what we would call the wounding, the re-wounding, whether we're suffering it or allowing our hurt to spill out onto others. Or we can choose the path of forgiveness. And so we see in this interview that Jarnell moves from wanting to seek revenge and hurting Andrew to telling him, that they become good friends, to telling Andrew, I love you. It was so remarkable, and I hope I get to share it with you. I welled up inside. And then at some point, Andrew shares, I was so taken back, like, I really don't deserve his love after what I did. We see them doing many things together, and, it is my knowing that as the two of them continue their journey and deepen their friendship, that Andrew will get to that place in his life where he can open up to know that he is worthy of love, of Jarnell's love, his own love, and the love of others, because he is the very essence of love himself. He was asleep for a little while, and now he is beginning to awaken. And at the end of the video clip that I was going to share, Jarnell says this: I didn't forgive for myself and for Andrew's sake, but I forgive and forgave for all of our sake, meaning the world, stating that the world can really use more kindness. And he speaks to a profound truth of what is in one is in the whole. What is in the whole is in the one. We are vibrational beings, right? What we are holding, who we are being, how we are acting, has a ripple effect on us, not only when we are hurting and suffering, but in our profound ability to be the presence of love, to model forgiveness. And now the two of them share their story all around the nation. So we get the blessing, the inspiration of this, the reminder of when we place our faith in forgiveness and walk that path, what's the seemingly impossible, the profound transformation and healing that can occur. And so last week I spoke about telling the story, which is what these two incredible souls did, not only in the CBS clip that I was going to show, but in countless interviews and going across the nation to youth groups, to church groups, and anyone that will have them speaking their story. And so we spoke about step one of the fourfold path of forgiveness was just that, telling the story. So I'm going to review before we go to our second step today, which is to name the hurt. And so to tell the story means, step one, we recount all of the facts. We tell the truth, factual information, all the details, step-by-step things that happen. And in this step, we refrain from passing moralistic judgment, assigning, the motives of why somebody acted or didn't act this way. It's just the facts, right? And then we are invited to tell our story, but we are asked to tell our story first to ourselves by journaling it. And then we're invited to tell it to another person, to maybe go to the person who caused or inflicted the hurt, and then maybe go public, like Jarnell and Andrew are. Could be at a support group, could be writing an article, writing a book. But Desmond and Nufu state that you are to go through all 4 steps before you even contemplate sharing with another. So now we're going to go to the second step, which is to name the hurt. And so to name the hurt, so we see here the 4 steps, right? Tell the story, we're on naming the hurt, and then eventually we'll go into granting forgiveness, renewing and releasing the relationship. But let's look at name the hurt. So this moves us past the facts to what did we experience? To having the courage and the vulnerability to name our hurts. Name the feelings one by one. Allowing them, accepting them, embracing them, and knowing that there is no wrong feeling, no right feeling, no bad feeling. Feelings are just there to share with us. And as we are able to name them, we allow the loosening of the strings of that hurt and the cellular memory to begin to loosen. And this requires of us to have a certain level of emotional intelligence, which is called EQ. To be actually able to name and understand your feelings. I know in previous weeks when we first began this and when we did the Eye of the Storm, I had given some resources. Nonviolent communication. If you go to their site, there's a list of feeling words. Also, Brene Brown. This community is involved in the Atlas of the Heart, and she has, if you go to her site, it's a free resource of a list of emotions. And so as you move through your day and allow yourself to be able to name and allow your emotions, you become more, your ability, not only then when a conflictual situation occurs, that you're able to do that. And when we're able to name our hurt, it helps us move out of denial, or that stage where we would rather just stuff it or minimize it, right? And so, actually, denial is also, it can get a bad rap, right? But here, what I'm talking about is one of the 5 stages of grief that was given to us by the late Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And so when we are in that denial, it is an automatic defense mechanism of our body to be able to cope with the stress and the whatever perceived hurt that we are able to take in any given moment. And that can be from an insult to somebody, doing something as heinous as what happened to Jarnell. And so it is a coping mechanism, and it helps us to pace, allow us to feel, bring up, in that, when we feel we're in that place of safety, to explore what has occurred and to be able to name the hurt. And I love this quote by Elizabeth: "There is grace in denial. It is nature's way of letting in only as much as we can handle." Think about that, right? Because sometimes, we can be hard on ourselves. And so denial is one of the stages of grief, and we could look at the others. We have anger, and I think that speaks for itself. That is where we might be tempted to go into that rewounding revenge, right? Looking to who to blame. And then bargaining. Trying not to accept what is. Well, if I do this, well then maybe this will happen. It's like, well, if I pray to God for this, then okay, God, if I never do this again in my life, will you allow my sister to be healed? So on and so on. And depression is where we begin to sense the sadness, the grief, And then we come to that place when we are ready to acceptance. I may not like what happened, but it is here. And I'm going to choose to allow it to heal me, for myself to be healed from the inside and transformed, rather than to live a life of bitterness. And so, why is it important? Let's look at the importance of naming our hurts, our feelings. Well, for one, it supports our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. What is unnamed can be stuffed and can make us sick. It can cause us to implode. You know, like, it's no big deal. But yet, maybe we suffer from chronic anxiety and depression. You know, maybe we have aches and pains that we can't understand why they won't go away. We can explode. But both of these, implode, explode, are taking that re-wounding cycle, right? That re-wounding cycle. And so explode could just even be simple, like, you know, you have bad days, you know, maybe an employee said something, you know, unkind. Maybe they told an untruth to your boss. And so maybe you're outraged. And instead of spending time with that, maybe you come in the door, and next thing you know, nobody's doing anything right. Why are you breathing so heavy? You shout. So on and so on. That could be an example of that. Suffering spilling out onto other people. And also, being able to have a level of emotional intelligence, being able to name your feelings and your hurts, leads to establishing a deeper connection with yourself, with other people in your life. If you can have compassion and understanding for yourself, for what you are feeling and going through, then we can begin to have it for others. And it actually helps us deepen our connection with the divine. Because if we have a shuttered heart and soul, knock, knock, how close are we, right? And allowing that God, the ever-present, mysterious substance of all life, is always there. But if we're shuttered with all this, it's like being in a rain cloud that just hovers over all the time. And so Desmond and Mufu Tutu share this about the importance of voicing our hurts. And they state this: when we give voice to our hurt, it loses its stranglehold on our lives and our identities. How often do we allow our experiences to define us instead of looking at it something that we are experiencing itself? And they continue by saying, a physical wound is something that is easiest to name, forgive, and heal from because it is obvious and tangible. A psychological wound is harder to name. It can attack our sense of safety, our need for acceptance and belonging, our identity, and our sense of worth as human beings. And in the book Dignity, written by Donna Hicks, she shares this: the pain felt from everyday assaults on our dignity are not imaginary. They can undermine our self-worth and relationships with others. She also points out that the neuroscientists have shown that a psychological wound, such as being excluded, stimulates the same part of the brain that is stimulated when there is a physical wound. In other words, our brains process and feel these injuries in the same way. They do not distinguish one type of hurt from another. It's pretty powerful. So when I go through the 4 steps of the fourfold path, and it's that time to share the story and share the hurt, who do I tell? How do I know who to pick? Well, again, we go through that process. First, start with sharing it with yourself, speaking it out loud. There's an exercise that I have in the back where it's clenching the stone and releasing the stone. So first it's you sharing that and being truthful to self. Then it is where you get to pick another person. If you choose to share it with the person who inflicted hurt, it could be a family member that you might feel comfortable with, or a friend, or if it's something as grievous as what happened to Dronell, you may want the support of counselors or other people. And then if you publicly choose to share your story. So when I am at that point where I decide that I'm going to share it with another, what are some of the guidelines I can use in selecting a person? And it's similar to what we spoke about last week. Someone who has the ability to hold a compassionate space, can understand, is a good listener, is somebody who is trustworthy, can hold confidentiality, and it is somebody that you might admire or notice that they may have a certain level of emotional intelligence, that you can see that they are able to share their own feelings and able to stand in a place of uncomfortability with others and do that. So you might bear witness. It could be a counselor, it could be a minister, a spiritual advisor, someone from a support group, so on and so on. And it is also someone who can hold to spirit, seeing the truth of you. What does that mean? Holding to your wholeness. That I am doing just that, holding your wholeness, listening, and I am not trying to fix you, tell you what to do, try to take away your pain, minimize your hurt. Oh, well, you know what? That's not so bad. At least now, look at, you have a new life, or something like that. Not to offer advice, and then not to say, oh, I'm going to tell you my story of woe. It's not saying that in a friendship you don't have that relationship, but when you're sharing this, it is just listening. The person in holding compassionate space, acknowledging your courage, affirming your courage, and just not doing anything else but that. It's a pretty powerful place. You may say, well, when and how often do I have to name my hurt? Because, hey, Reverend Angela, this could turn out to be a full-time job. I have to name it all the time. And so what Desmond and Winfrey share is this. You get to decide, ultimately, right? None of this is a have to. But basically what they share is this. Anytime that you feel an insult or a pang of hurt is to name it, right? To be able to name it. Because when we aren't able to name it in what we might call small, like I said before, then we are empowered when we are in some things that might seem a little bit more profound. And I love this story that Umfu shares. She says, when my 2-year-old at play knocked over my favorite vase, I was tempted to swing around and smack her hand, a useless act of retaliation masquerading as discipline. Instead, I said, oh no, I love that vase. It was a birthday gift from my best friend. Oh, I'm so sad. Honey, we should play that game outside. Oh well, let's sweep up the mess. I told the story. I named the hurt. I acknowledged that my 2-year-old was a human toddler, with much to learn, and I accepted that the broken vase could not be unbroken. Just that quickly, it was done, and I renewed the relationship of a loving parent with an active child. We see and hear the exampleness of the insidiousness. Because when first presenting the cycle of revenge, we're like, oh, no, that's not me. But when we start to look at these little examples of how we might have come from generations where it was taught. Smacking, hitting on the bottom. You're bad. That's bad. Right? Anybody? It sounds familiar? And the insidious of this is that it is entering that using discipline to where people as a young child begin to establish themselves in the untruth of who they really are, right? And so now we have the opportunity to wake up to that, and here in this, where she just went through it like that, right? It didn't, she was tempted to swing around and do what she normally did, but chose again, right? Choose again. And so in closing, I invite you into the second step of the fourfold path, which is to name your hurt, right? We've been going through this process where we looked at what forgiveness was, what it wasn't, looking at your willingness to forgive, for you to name something that you are wanting to seek, go through the path of forgiveness with. We went into telling the story, and now this week's exercise is around naming your hurt, your feelings. I do have an exercise in the back if you'd like to take that, which involves the stone activity and a writing activity. So I believe it is a blue copy. And I'd like to end with another reflection given to us in the beautiful work of Desmond and Menfu. If you want, you can close your eyes. If you want to read along, that is fine too. But let us take that deep breath and drop into our heart space. As we allow these words to penetrate our heart and soul, meet me here in your heart. Speak my name. I am not your enemy. I am your teacher. I may even be your friend. Let us tell our truth, you and I. My name is anger. I say you have been wronged. My name is shame. My story is your hidden pain. My name is fear. My story is vulnerability. My name is resentment. I say things should have been different. My name is grief. My name is depression. My name is heartache. My name is anxiety. I have many names and many lessons. I am not your enemy. I am your teacher. Beautiful. Let's take that breath in. I wish you a very blessed week. Namaste.